We're now ready to apply a finish to our timber parts for the clock, and by now you'll have spent some time using one of these sandpaper boards to finish every single surface to make sure that all dirt and marks, any pencil scores are removed. Any of the ingrained pencil from when you use things like the marking gauge should hopefully be gone, and we'll also sharpen up any of the surfaces that are slightly rounded. So it's important you spend a good bit of time with one of these sandpaper boards. You can also find some with finer grade sandpaper that will give a smoother finish. So you should start with the roughest and then hopefully finish up with the smoothest grade of sandpaper to give nice clean finishes. To apply our finishes, we are going to use what we've called in the department the painting tree. So you can see this strange device here, and basically it's a long stick with wire sticking out of it, and you're going to attach your pieces of material onto the bits of wire so that you don't have to touch the piece of wood while you're applying the paint or while you're applying the finish. So I'm going to set it to look at this one here. You can see two of the bits of wire are sticking out here. One of them is bent at a slight angle, so what I can do is I can find the slot that we have in the timber and I can put this piece of wire into the slot. And it'll only go in at a slight angle, you can see it sloping downhill. I'm going to now twist it, find the slot of the other piece of wire and allow that to slot in. And now it sits floating in mid-air, meaning that I don't have to hold this at any point when I'm applying my finish. Okay. Obviously we'll take it out of here once it's thoroughly dry, we'll inspect it and we'll maybe let someone else on to use this. But we thought that this would be a good idea to stop people getting fingerprints, stop people getting paint and varnish in their hands. To begin with, we're not actually going to be using any strong paint or any varnish or anything like that. We're just going to use a solution you can see here which is labelled sanding sealer, and it says water and glue mix. It's got a little term there that we'd like you to be familiar with called raising the grain. So this raises the grain. Actually what will happen when we do this is that it will make our work feel slightly jaggy and rough. What will have happened will be that all of the fibres in the timber will have raised up and set in a fixed upright position. So it will feel quite bristly and it will feel quite rough after we do this. But critically, once we've sanded it a second time, when we've removed it from this, we'll have sealed the surface. So that's why we're saying it's called sanding sealer. And that'll mean that it will seal out the outside world, it will stop any other dirt ingraining itself or getting in. Hopefully it will resist fingerprints a bit better and it will allow us to move on to the next stage, which after that will be varnish. There's not a lot to show here. I'm sure by now in your school career you know how to apply paint, you know how to do painting. There's a little bit more to it or else we'd all just go out and become painters and decorators. So little tips. Put the absolute minimum on the brush. You can see that there's drips coming off my brush right now. Okay, that's no good, that's too much on my brush. It's dripping back into the pot, you can't see that in the camera. So every single time you take paint or any solution, in this case sanding sealer, onto the brush, you should dab it on the edge of the paint pot to remove excess paint. So you'll see me do that like this here. Okay, so I'm removing a fair amount from the brush. So my brush will not drip anymore. I'm now going to take it up and I'm going to start to apply it to my timber. So I'm going to move in straight lines, and straight away I can see runs appearing. I can see the liquid starting to run down it, so that's bad. We want to keep the paintbrush moving and move the solution all over the surface. We also want it to soak in. So it's a fine line we need to work between having too much on and not enough to actually soak in. So while we're doing this, we'll be going over it a couple of times. Other things to think about when you're doing this. What's the top? What's the bottom? By now I've identified that this surface is one of the best surfaces, so I'll probably be having this surface facing you as the top. So I'm going to make sure I spend some time making sure that's extra perfect. I can see a few drips coming off this now. It's good to catch them. Obviously when you're doing this you must wear an apron and you should be working in an area that's protected with cardboard or something to stop this going in the desk. If it's hanging over a desk, be careful it's not going to drip on your shoes. I'm now doing what we will call the end grain, so I'm up here on the left hand side and that's where the wood's especially porous, so the solution's soaking in quite a lot, so I have to go over this several times. have to also adjust myself and stand below this to go on the underside. This might be an area that if you didn't do carefully, you might forget, you might not get a good coating on. I can see a bit down here where I'm pointing with the brush right now is looking a bit dry. So the whole time we're doing this, we're analysing what we're doing, we're self-evaluating and just checking it's going well, and if it's not, we're changing something about what we're doing. So a thorough and methodical approach will mean you should cover every single surface. So I'm revisiting the paint pot probably for the third time. You can get quite a lot of this done with not a lot on your brush. Be aware of other people who might be using this at the same time. Don't want to paint them, you don't want to paint their clothes. Take your care, take the best of care when you're doing this. Got a big drip here where the paint or the solution has ran down just through gravity. So before I finish up, I've got to make sure that the runs are eliminated. Any big bubbles, any runs, any brush bristles that have fallen out of the paintbrush while we've done this, have to make sure we get them dealt with before we finish up and walk away. Okay, so that's that coated with a sanding sealer solution. It's just glue and water mixed together. Purpose of that is to raise the grain so it seals out the outside world and it gets sanded down later for a nice smooth surface that we can build on top of with other finishes like varnish or paint. Okay,